Dating is dead.
We know!
But this shouldn't have happened. Romance is one of the strongest forces in human nature, and yet we managed to do something no generation has ever done before in human history. We got men and women to stop wanting each other. How the heck did we pull that off? Well, there's an old episode of House that might give us an idea. In this episode, Amber gets hit in a bus accident and passes away. But that shouldn't have happened. Her injuries weren't bad enough to kill her. What the crash did do, though, was crush her kidneys, which turned the harmless-looking medication she had taken that morning into a deadly poison, because her body had no way to filter it out. And as we're about to see, that's exactly what's happening to us. In the last two videos we did on the timeline of the dating collapse, we basically looked at the medications our culture was taking for 2 centuries, and who was feeding them to us. Today, we tell the story of the crash. But first, we need to go back to the early 2000s and look at the last few pills we took before impact. Video games are getting really popular. Personally, I got my first triple kill at a Halo LAN party without firing a shot, and I've been chasing that feeling ever since. At this point, video games aren't just a nerd hobby anymore. They now take up so much of men's time that most men's real lives are actually pretty boring. Now, let's not be too harsh on them. Remember, we took away outdoor play from them as kids in the early 90s. And boys don't like to sit around inside being bored, so as far as excitement or adventure, this is kinda all they have now. But as a side effect, men's social skills begin to decline.
I am scared of women.
Now, the guys often don't perceive just how fake their in-game achievements are, but the girls can see it plain as day. And since women are mostly attracted to men based on markers that indicate he'll provide a steady flow of resources from him to her, that's a problem. Because he feels like he's winning, but none of those achievements can flow from him to her because nothing he's getting is real. This is why women consistently rate video games as one of the least attractive hobbies a man can have. And at this point, most men game every spare second they can. Again, it's kind of all they have. Basically, we're stacking debuffs on the guys and making them as unattractive as possible right now, and it only gets worse from here. Thanks to a steady diet of guilt, men now feel ashamed about being what they are. And they're afraid to display any masculinity or strength because they're afraid of being an oppressor. You can see a reflection of all this in the TV shows and advertisements of this time, where men are universally depicted as idiots who always need to be rescued by their smarter, more capable wife or girlfriend. Now, men go along with this because they feel guilty about supposedly oppressing women for millennia, and letting women put them down like this gives men a sense that they're paying emotional reparations to women, which takes the edge off the guilt they feel for being male because, hey, I'm a terrible, awful man, but at least I'm paying for it by letting women treat me like dirt. I don't need to tell you how badly this damages the self-perception of boys and young men who are raised in the middle of all this. This problem also compounds on itself because it makes young men hate themselves unfairly, which makes them even less attractive to women, who then reject them. And that rejection then looks like evidence that, hey, I really actually do suck that bad. I am that terrible, so my self-hatred is justified, and creates a downward spiral. On a personal note, I was able to get past that self-loathing, but many young men among my people, Christians, aren't. This is because most modern Protestants don't make a distinction between fair shame, like for our sin nature, versus unfair shame, like those of false accusations. But that's for another video. High-speed internet becomes ubiquitous around this time, and easy access to porn comes with it. Porn has a long list of side effects that are incredibly destructive for men. Among other things, it makes it difficult for men to be attracted to normal human women. That said, there are a couple of misconceptions that pop up because of this. Many people start to blame the decline of dating on porn, and men in general, even though if you watched the last video, you know the decline started way before this, and the data doesn't support this view anyway. The numbers indicate that even though men's standards did go up in theory, in practice, they aren't stratospherically delusional most of the time, and most men still want a relationship with a normal woman. Stuff we won't be able to say about women's standards in a minute or two, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The other misconception is that only men deal with porn, which just isn't true. These days, just as many women do as well. Now, people don't perceive it that way because most of women's porn isn't visual. It's written. And people don't count that as porn, even though she's imagining herself having sex with another person just as vividly.
I feel like this is what my wife's books look like before they all start each other.
This means men get called out and rebuked for their sin, while women are, once again, let off the hook. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that men's porn use is fine and good. The point I'm making is this is not the car crash like many people believe. It is a toxin floating around in our system, though. We're not done stacking debuffs on the men, though, because the economy. How we doing? Remember back in the 1950s how 65% of households were traditional single-income houses where only the husband worked? Yeah, by 2002, that number had fallen to just 13%. The economy has now been reshaped so that women no longer have the option to not work. This means dating becomes more competitive for women because there are far fewer men who can provide the lifestyle they expect. More on that in just a second. One last debuff before we move on. See, if you play as the Christian subclass, like I do, you get a special debuff. Remember, in the late 90s, Christians were already heavily influenced by the blue pill, and most were teaching the courtship model of not dating. But that failed so badly that many Christians at this point have just sort of given up on teaching guys how to date altogether. Instead, most fall back on quoting Jesus in Matthew 6. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. And while that is at least half true, and that, yeah, you should seek the kingdom before a spouse, that is more important, there's a couple of problems with using this verse here. First is that Jesus didn't list a wife as one of the things God would give you for seeking the kingdom. The second is that it makes about as much sense to quote this verse to an aspiring husband as it does to an aspiring electrician. Using this verse in this context makes it sound like God's just gonna snap his fingers and make a woman fall in love with you. The trouble is this gives a massive advantage to the guys who are naturally attractive and have already got the stuff women are looking for. Because the less desirable guys who would need to work harder to compete with them are told that it's not a competition and that they don't need to achieve anything or work on themselves, so they don't. And they tumble down the draft order in women's eyes even more. This makes it easier for the natural high achievers, and it leads to a lot of rejection, heartache, and confusion for the guys who aren't. And nobody is allowed to tell these guys the truth about why they're failing with women, because that would mean admitting that women don't choose men romantically or spiritually, they choose men practically. We can't do that because of, because of the implications. So instead, these guys are told it's just God's will for them to be single right now, so they just need to get used to the loneliness and heartache and tough it out like a good little passive Christian boy. Let's look at society. Progressives have been working towards their vision of utopia for a while, but in order to achieve it, they need to reshape humanity into their image. And in the early 2000s, their main strategy, the long march through the institutions, gets a big win. The death of academic disconfirmation in the social sciences. Conservatives are now so outnumbered that even if they are brave enough to contradict their progressive colleagues, there simply aren't enough of them in the peer review process to screen out everything that progressives put out. This means intersectional feminism and elites who want the population to shrink can now force science to confirm whatever narrative they want. They can also edit history now as well.
I don't care what they tell you in school. Cleopatra was black.
In other words, they can lie about whatever they want while maintaining academic credibility. This gives progressives a new moral high ground that brings corporations, churches, the media, and even the government under their influence to a degree never seen before in the West. Now, after this, we see a few interesting new narratives start to pop up, starting with identity obsession. Today we know this as identity politics, but it didn't start off that way. It began as a simple story about your life, which tells us that what you are matters more than what you do, because supposedly your identity determines more of your outcomes in life than your decisions do. Now, a lot of people love this idea because it frees them from responsibility and any guilt they feel for making dumb or selfish decisions. It's not my fault. I was born this way. You can't hold me accountable. Now, to be clear, this isn't the car crash either, but it is another toxin in our bloodstream. Now, before we move on though, there is one identity in particular we should look at: being fat.
I am very fat and very sexy.
You had it right. You are one right there, and then you spreaded false information.
That's right, this is when body positivity begins to blow up, pun intended. And there are two motives for this that make it really interesting. First, the economy is getting weaker, which means fewer men can provide women a house, which is the minimum acceptable standard for just about any woman who wants a serious relationship. This is because most women grew up in a house and they don't want their kids to grow up in a worse environment than they did. That means there's now a lot more competition among women for that shrinking number of men. So healthy, attractive women love body positivity because it keeps unhealthy women from becoming competition. You go, my plus-size sister. Of course you're a 10 at any size. Oh, wait. Oh, what's that? He said he didn't want you? Oh, he's just fat-phobic or something. Just shame him for it and keep doing what you're doing, sis. Now, second, as always, it's about power.
We stay hungry, we devour.
Overweight women now see their fatness as an identity, not a responsibility. That means in her mind, she's stuck that way. So there's no way for her to compete with healthier, more attractive women. Not to worry though, she's got a strategy to get around this. Instead of taking responsibility for her own attractiveness and going to the gym if she can't get the man she wants, she pulls out the shame shotgun and blasts men for their preferences, aka beauty standards. Now, if this looks coercive, that's because it is. But doesn't matter. It feels morally right to her. And that is thanks to the narrative work feminism started a century ago. They convinced us that your power is your worth, and that women were oppressed and powerless for generations, so they deserve everything they want now as reparations. So if a woman wants an attractive man, she's entitled to him. If he says no because he prefers thinner, healthier women, then he is withholding something she's entitled to, and therefore controlling her, which is obviously oppressive and degrading to her. So as she sees it, men's preferences are the moral evil here, not her manipulative shame tactics.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Fascinating stuff. Moving on. To the late 2000s, a unique bunch of men begins to form a loose coalition online. Thanks to the rise of online forums and such, men begin to compare notes about their experiences with women, and they realize something is off. See, they were promised that if they were soft, vulnerable, nice guys who let women take charge and catered to women's feelings, that those women would be attracted to them and respect them. But when they did those things, what they actually got was rejected, disrespected, and often just ignored. In fact, if anything, these women seem disgusted by them, a feeling that will later be classified as the ick. So confused, these guys start digging into research and running their own social experiments to find out the truth about why all this is happening. And what they discovered was the lost knowledge of hypergamy that their parents had tried to bury.
Women are hypergamous. They mate across and up dominance hierarchies.
And now that these guys are aware of that, they start throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And find that when they stand their ground, disagree with women, do what he thinks is right instead of appeasing her, and basically just doing everything they were told was wrong, women are actually much more attracted to them. And they treat these guys with more respect. This is the beginning of the red pill. Back then, it was just a group of guys who were tired of being lied to and losing with women because of it. So they were trying to learn the hard facts about what women respond well to, what they don't, and why. That was kind of it. Now, it should be said, these guys are far from perfect. Like the rest of our culture, they don't really have a grounded moral compass. So even though they're really good at figuring out what's going on and how women work, the way they say you should use that information and use women is often pretty self-centered. And that will cause some problems for them later on. Now, these guys are sort of on the fringes of online forums, and they go relatively unknown for quite a while. In fact, the red pill's quite unpopular at first. See, it turns out most men don't want to take the red pill because it's kind of bitter, it's unromantic, and the blue pill feels way better.
Ignorance is bliss.
Even though it isn't getting men very good results anymore. Speaking of moral compass, one thing we haven't talked about much yet is the state of Christianity in the West. Now, this matters for us because Christianity has been a central piece of American culture for generations. Most people through the 70s, 80s, and 90s said they held some kind of Christian faith. But around the turn of the millennium, Christianity started losing about 1.1% of the population every year like clockwork. And it's here that culture switches from God-centered to human-centered. This means many people now have no place to ground their morality.
Atheists, when we ask them, where do you get your morality from? It's like asking, Mark, where do you get your trousers from? And Mark going, I'm wearing trousers. Yeah. You're like, no, where do you get it from? Like, how dare you tell me I'm not wearing trousers?
So instead of following Jesus' principles of sacrificing yourself for the sake of others, people now sacrifice other people for their own satisfaction and use their own completely made up moral systems to justify it. This makes relationships unstable because you can't trust anyone to look out for you anymore. And why would they? They have no reason to do anything good for you unless it makes them feel good, which rarely happens and doesn't last forever. As Pastor Mark Sayers puts it, people do this because they want the kingdom without the king. People love the good fruit of Jesus' kingdom and his morality, the stability, the justice, the trust, the genuine love, and so on, but they don't love the king who anchors that morality. And they especially hate the thought of submitting their will to his. Trouble is, when we take God off the throne and put ourselves there, that also cuts off the source of life at the heart of the kingdom. And no matter how hard everyone tries to be a good person, the culture's fruit becomes rotten and inedible eventually. Now, here's where I'm gonna get in trouble. Many Christians say this is the car crash that's killing dating. This is one of the reasons why you don't see Christians paying much attention to the collapse of dating. Most assume there's a sort of spiritual trickle-down Reaganomics in effect, where if we just focus on discipleship and get people right with God, that will trickle down to the rest of their life and fix their relational struggles as well. So why bother talking about downstream issues when you can fix it at the source? Now, while I would partly agree with that, in theory, none of that appears to be happening in practice. Possibly because, for one, this is a sneaky form of prosperity gospel. And two, there are many cultures in the world far more godless than the West. And while they do have a ton of rotten fruit, they're still somehow able to have a functioning courtship process. Jesus-less behavior isn't unique to the West, but the dating collapse is. Also, if this theory was right, then solid, genuine churches would be a safe haven from all this. Because if poor discipleship is the real problem, then just go where the good disciples are, and boom, you'll find a good wife easy. Now, solid churches are still probably the best place to find a wife because it's the only place left where any of the women ground their morality in something higher than their feelings. But they are no safe haven, and relationship formation is slowing to a halt, even in the best churches right now. So, even though I'll catch heat from my fellow Christians for saying it, godlessness is not the car crash either, but we are inches away from impact. In 2007, Apple releases the iPhone. Now calm down, no, this is not the car crash, let's just let this play out. Social media giants like Facebook and Instagram are no longer tied to our computers, they now live in our pockets where they have no limits on their access to our attention. You combine that with video games and most people now live their lives behind a screen more than the real world. This causes social skills to atrophy even further, and this hits men especially hard, making them even less attractive to women. This also has a curious effect on people's self-perception, which hits men and women differently. The visual nature of social media makes it easy for women to get attention and affirmation online, while most men now struggle to get any attention anywhere. This crushes men's self-esteem while it massively inflates women's perception of themselves and what they bring to the table. Women now think they're more attractive than they actually are, and remember, thanks to hypergamy, they only aim up from where they see themselves. This squeezes most of women's attention to the very top of the heap of men. Now, this isn't a huge problem as long as women don't have access to all of those men at the top, because they'll eventually have to go with whatever men are around, and oh, that's a dating app. And another one, and another one. Oh, no, loud, what have I done? Dating apps and DMs now mean women have algorithms pushing only the most attractive and successful men onto their phones, and they now have a send message button that makes them feel like they have access to those ultra premium guys and the top tier lifestyles they provide. And all of a sudden, men aren't competing against just a handful of guys in their community, they're competing against the best of the best in their entire state. Now, even that isn't an extinction level event as long as women don't have a strong motive to push for those high level guys. Remember back in the 60s, free love presented a similar challenge with increased access to sex, but it didn't kill dating because men were still relatively equal in masculinity and economically. So as long as men aren't too far apart, we're still okay. And bang. Remember back in part 2 how banks in the 90s were getting people into houses they couldn't afford? Well, that did solve the low home ownership rates among the younger crowd until the bubble burst, and most of those people lost their homes. Now the economy is in tatters. Inflation begins to run away from the average worker, and most men can no longer afford a house, renting, or buying. Now let's recap how young women see this situation. See, she's been told her whole life she's a queen who deserves only the best of everything. Plus, thanks to the economy, very few men in her age range can provide her the house that she's hoping for. So from her perspective, she feels like, hey, I'm a top tier woman, so I deserve the best. And in this economy, I need the best. And now I have access to the best. So why on earth would I settle for average, even if she is average herself? Now, it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out that this creates a math problem. If 80% of the women only want 20% of the guys or less, that leaves about 60% or 2/3 of the men with nothing at all. We'll come back to that number later. The economy was the biggest safety restraint that we had to keep hypergamy in check. It was also the last one left. You add to that the pills we've been taking for the last 100+ years, and the consequences are now hitting young men like a ton of bricks. Hypergamy is back, baby, and this time it's in a coke-fueled rage. Now we should point out that this is just the car crash. Dating isn't dead, but it is in the ER unconscious. And what's really scary is things are about to get much worse.